All right. Welcome to the Edgewalker Cafe. Today is May 18th. Our guest is Heather Roan Robbins, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Judy. And hello, everyone. I am tuning in from my cute little apartment in Harlem, New York City. Please put where you're tuning in from and say hello in our chat as we talk. Judy, I am so privileged to facilitate this cafe. Thank you, as always. And I'm so excited to introduce you all to a very wonderful and talented, world-renowned astrologer, Heather Roan Robbins. I have to share how I know her before I read her bio. So because she holds such a huge space in my life journey. I love that this tickles you, Heather. I met Heather in 2005 when I was looking to enroll in seminary. And the first seminary that I looked into was the New Seminary for Interfaith Studies here in New York City. There were two at the time. And I attended an open house to ask some questions and to meet some of the staff and get a feel for it. And Heather had just completed her seminary journey and was recently ordained. And so, we were all asking questions and staying present to the staff. But what Heather shared about her journey, her seminary journey, and how becoming an interfaith minister fit into her spiritual journey and all of her work spoke so profoundly to me that right then and there I decided I'm going to the New Seminary, and I was ordained in 2007, and I asked Heather to be my companion and my mentor and my champion on that journey, which she did exquisitely. So it is with great excitement that I introduce you all to Heather Roan Robbins. Let me read her wonderful bio, and then you will all join me in a warm welcome. Heather Roan Robbins, Master of Theology, is a ceremonialist, counselor, and a world-renowned choice-oriented astrologer with 40+ years experience and an active online international practice. Heather has lived in New York City, New Mexico, Minnesota, and now lives in Western Montana, where her mate teaches at a tribal college. Through the 1990s, she was the house astrologer for a group of family therapists in New England who supervised her work. She has worked in human resources and advised many human resource departments to put together a good team, and which helps members of those teams understand each other. She is a member of Spiritual Directors International, OPA, Organization for Professional Astrology, and the English Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. For over 30 years, she's written a weekly column for the Santa Fe New Mexican and several websites on astrology by day and week, not by sign, We Moon Yearly Overview, and has authored books Moon Wisdom and Everyday Palmistry. Recently, through Hay House, she authored the Star Codes Oracle Deck, now translated into 10 languages, and is under contract for a book on choice-based astrology. Welcome, Heather. Please join me in welcoming Heather Roan Robbins.
Welcome, welcome.
Yay. Hello. Nothing like an introvert being introduced by Sandra.
Yes. My excitement just oozes over. And
it's lovely. Thank you, Sandra.
A complete pleasure. So to begin with, I would like for you to share the story. So I've invited Heather as my first guest on my podcast. She was my first guest for the debut on The Edge of Every Day. And this is also the first question I asked her on that. And I love this story so much, and it sets the tone for our conversation. Please tell us how you became an astrologer. It seemingly was in your DNA.
Well, it's sort of the family joke is my father is an abstract mathematician. He was a topologist and invented or was on the ground level of topological dynamics. My mother was a psychiatric nurse. You put them in a blender, you get an astrologer. They didn't believe me, but it was the idea, both of them were dealing with realms that were not only of concrete reality. Well, they were the absent-minded professor and the very absent-minded wife. My mom's Alzheimer's began to kick in over time. But the process of looking at the world in a symbolic way was very natural to me. And I, as a child, by the time I was 11, I had a real collection of mythological books and studied mythology in any culture I could find it.
Stop with the licking.
And that began to feed into my interest in astrology. This was in the mid-60s, so there was a lot around, and I did my first astrological calendar, breaking up the year by sign, not by month, when I was 11. And then I started taking it from there. I worked with the niece of a famous astrologer in my high school. When I was freshman in high school, she was the telephone operator. And I saw that with her books, with her astrological information, she was a better counselor than the school psychologist was. Many times. And without her books, she was a nice lady. So what was it in those books? What was it in that little extra bit of information that gave her a lead on being able to see people, have them feel seen, and give them guidance? And one day I was working with her and I heard her being a little concerned, and she spoke, to three teachers. And she said to these three teachers, who she had their charts for everybody in the school, could you be a little careful this weekend? And one was an elderly man who was the drama teacher, and he died of a heart attack on stage. Another one was a young man who fell down some stairs and broke a leg. The third man took her advice, was careful, was just fine. And so I had that set up from the beginning. And then I said, please tell me everything you know. I need this information, and where do I go from here? So I started studying as much as I could with her, and that gave me a framework to then, study astrology back in the day when there was no internet, and you had to get your astrology book by going up on the second floor and knocking to get into the occult library. But in that process, I had that first example that you could make choice. And I think this is so important, that there was no predestination. All three of these, and later on I got to see how, were challenged by some aspects that brought an unexpected charge into their chart. And they could use that charge to accomplish something, or if they were thinking about what they were about to do rather than what they were actually doing, become more accident prone. Or the elderly man who had wonky electrics anyway and died just where he wanted to at the age of 84 in his Uranus return on stage, happily teaching a class. So that concept of choice in the astrology, how do you work with it? Not that you're predestined, not that you're stuck, but that this was a tool. And that this tool manifested in so many different ways. It manifested in, and that's what I've come to love about astrology, is that it's a language of connection. And talking about the edges, it's the language of symbolic connection that can manifest in a very pragmatic way, in our metaphysics, in our emotions, in our interpersonal pieces. And if we see that map, we might be able to navigate it and keep the wind in our sails versus crash on the rocks. So that was my hope with it.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the way that you speak about it right now is the reason why I wanted you as my first guest. And we in Edgewalkers understand being a practical mystic. Mm-hmm. And what you just spoke about, so many of us have heard that astrology or any pursuit of anything spiritual or esoteric is woo-woo. But we Edgewalkers understand that we are going between the worlds and using both to bring that information down into a practical, grounded place. So I love what you just shared about that. That is why you speak so eloquently. You speak very metaphysically as well as with great grounded practical wisdom about this process. So how does that relate to charts. I mean, first and foremost, there's plenty of people in this group, I'm sure, that have more than a layman's knowledge about what astrology is, but let's just start with the chart. What is a chart? I mean, I have more than a layman's understanding, but would love to hear how you describe what a chart is and how do you interpret that into action?
So first of all, I would say when we look at the stars, I do not think that the stars make us do anything. I think they are being affected by the same bigger patterns that we are being affected by. I describe it like if you're walking by a fence and you see horns over the fence, do you want to put your feet underneath the fence? No, it's not that the horns will hurt your feet, but they are both being moved by something that you can't see mysteriously. And I see astrology as that it's like the horns, not necessarily a negative approach, but that they are symbols, they are being moved by something and they are easy for us to map. And that there is a relationship between every part of the universe and us in a very concrete, solid way, in a very metaphysical way. Now, the mythology of most cultures, the easiest one to read is the Greek and Roman versions because they're so psychological. But almost every mythology around the world has similar archetypes that can help us understand the nature of the planets. And sometimes they're directly exposed to it, but sometimes it helps us see more power in it. The South American, Latin American mythology around Venus is far more fierce, but she's considered fierce as a morning, that powerful emotion that Venus can bring up in us. When we look at the astronomy of each of these pieces, we see wonderful symbols in the astronomy of the planets that help us understand the meaning for the planets. But when we take a chart, we take a look at where the planets were in relationship to the surface of the Earth at the moment that you popped in. And we take a look at what planets were below the Earth, what were above. When you look at a chart, it's the opposite of a map. Instead of west being on this side and east being on the other, it's the other because you're inside looking out. So sunrise is on the left and sunset is on the right. And I'm left-right dyslexic, so I think I have that right. But so I see very well in a circle, but I am not linearly oriented. So we see where you are. If you could come in and if you look at the chart, you see where you were. You would be in the center if you could have stood when you were born. And if you could have pointed to the eastern horizon, we see the sign coming up over the eastern horizon. And that comes back down to what is the zodiac. There's no wrong way of looking at the stars. Everybody has their own system. It's important that you stay consistent within your system to understand your system. In the West, and the Western astrology and the Eastern or Vedic or sidereal astrology were the same when astrology began, oh, so many years ago. In the West, we still define the signs based on the Earth's reaction, the seasons, how the relationship between the sun and the moon begins. So we begin our zodiac at the first moment of spring, at the spring equinox, summer at the summer solstice. We take the charts there. Vedic astrology follows the constellations themselves. Now, once upon a time, those exactly lined up. Now they're different. To me, and I've looked at both of them, I'm still find that the symbolism in the Western astrology, because I'm very earth-based, I'm Druid, I'm here, works better for me, and the charts seem to work better for me. But some people swear by the other system. And again, I don't think it's a wrong way. I think you're cutting up an orange in different directions. And so each one's going to get a little different perspective. And you can't read your system into somebody else's. So the difference between the charts. So here we are, but whatever system you use, you still feel that here you are when you were born. That's the point. That's the horizon. The rising sign is what is just rising on the eastern side. And that rising sign is your window into the world. It's how the world sees you, how you see the world. It's your filter system. Then we divide all the houses up, and they go 1 through 12 counterclockwise. It's like, remember, you're inside the map looking out. You're inside the chart looking out. If you were inside a clock looking out, the numbers would look like they're going counterclockwise from when you look at it. So the houses are each compartments or stage settings in your life. Like you're looking at a village inside you, symbolically. How do you enter the world? What affects your approach to the material world, starting with your own body? How do you feel about your body, your values? What do you value enough to make money off of? How did you learn to communicate with your siblings? You can go all around from birth to death in the houses. In one way, you can say body parts from head to feet. You can just talk about different parts of their life. They're all related. The houses echo off each other. How do you relate to your resources? How do you relate to other people's resources? It's called the Death, Sex, and Taxes house, the house of mysteries, how you relate to their thoughts, their bodies, their monies, their power, all of those interesting dynamics that are connected. How do you come into the world? Sunset is how other people come into your world. How do you rate with all equals? It's interesting that open warfare, law, and marriage are all in the same house. It's all the ways we relate to an equal. And then as we go all the way around. So we look at the houses, we look to see who's in those houses, what archetypes are living there, how do they relate to one another. You know, the most important thing to look at is where the sun is. You know, what house where do you shine from? Where do you go for renewal? Where's your source of energy? Because all the other planets reflect the sun's light. The moon, which is as important as the sun sign and changes sign every 2.5 days, speaks about our emotional connection. One of my favorite ways of training people, especially when I was living in New York, was to ask people to go to the subway and know what sign the moon is in today and watch how everybody's clothes and behavior live out that moon sign perfectly. They don't know it, but the moon often talks about that unconscious behavior. You know, in your personal chart, it speaks about your whole female lineage, how you were raised at home, what habits are, what helps you feel at home, what helps you not feel at home. How you nurture yourself, but it's the kind of early pre-verbal unconscious material. And as well as, you know, what makes you feel deeply at home. But it is amazing how the people dress and act as the moon sign that day, every day.
Oh, I'm so sure. Well, in terms of, I'll link in the interpreting into action into this next question. Edgewalkers, one of the wonderful qualities of being an Edgewalker is that they sense coming trends before they emerge, that they feel into future. So how does astrology align with that? You spoke about archetypes, so both. How can astrology, how can that help us understand collectively? And of course, that points to wanting to know what's happening in the world. But how do we use that collectively, but also individually in terms of free will and choice? How does that all line up?
Absolutely. I often think of the Venn diagram of our life as being our free will and choice, grace, and the physical form of the body and the astrological patterns that we're part of, and grace, and I think karmic places. And that there's always an intersection between grace, free will, and what we have to work with, the astrology of the moment and the physicality of the moment. And the magic happens in the middle between all of those. So astrology can help you map the energetic fields of the day. If you see that we're always in the midst of it, the planets are always shifting and changing, moving and thriving, and we can work with that pattern. I think of the term disaster, means dis against aster, the stars. To constellate is a lot more fun, to work with the stars rather than to fight them. But I remember Sri Chinmoy, a Hindu teacher who was an astrologer also, but he would ask his astrologer buddies to choose the worst time to run a race, to do something, to whatever. And then he would do it at those times to prove that you are never hemmed in, you never stuck. It was always more challenging for him to do it then, but he wanted to prove that you were never stuck. And I would say that to you, to know what the aspects are can help you understand and be aware of it. And I think of that, I was listening to a wonderful article on motor neurons in our brain that mirror what's going on around us. And if we're not conscious, someone walks into our energy fields who is anxious, that our brain starts to produce anxiety as an echo.
Yeah,
And
mirror neurons, yeah.
Right, the mirror neurons. If we are aware of them, then we can stop that process. We can go, oh, you're anxious. I need to bring in calm for 2. And begin to, but it takes that consciousness that I am adapting to something. What am I adapting to? Now I have more room for choice. And I think I feel the same way about astrological patterns. If you know what's going on, you can adapt.
Mhm.
One of the things that Patricia brought up right before we brought everybody in was tomorrow's new moon in Taurus.
Mm.
Now, the new moon is always a good time to begin. It's where the sun and moon come together on the same sign and they work together and you feel the flow. In a chart, the new moon, if you're born on a new moon, it usually means that your mother and father work together. The consciousness and unconscious in your life work together for better or worse. It can sometimes mean, if you look at that, the sun and moon are conjunct, but having bad aspects coming from them, you might talk about parental collusion and, that you couldn't go to one to separate from the other because they backed each other up. And it could be a gift of peace, or it could be the worst of abuse. You just had to kind of, all you knew is that they work together in your psyche. So we have that. The new moon is always a beginning where sun and moon line up together. This new moon is in the earth sign. All signs are, one of the 4 elements, and either cardinal, fixed, or mutable. Cardinal begins, fixed are earthy, and they hold, mutable are explainers and communicators. So tomorrow is fixed earth, Taurus, new moon. So it's the beginning of anything you really want to take root. If you want to plant a garden, that's the time to do it, tomorrow morning. The moon goes into Gemini, a few hours after noon, and then it's plant ideas tomorrow afternoon and all weekend. But tomorrow morning, if you've got plants you want to put in the ground, babies you want to start, you have projects you want to begin, a book you want to start, tomorrow is a good time to plant those seeds, ideas, projects, beginnings. Over the weekend, Mars and Venus are both in Cancer right now. The 2 planets we associate with the emotional realm. And the planets that are on either side of Earth, are the closest planets to Earth. And they are both in kind of self-protective, a little tender, a little emotional, sensitive Cancer. Mars is about to leave and go into Leo over the weekend. And Mars in Leo is more feisty. Mars takes about roughly 2 months in a sign on the average. It's about 2 years around the zodiac. And it goes into Leo, where it's much more outgoing, expressive, comfortable in expressing ourselves. A little melodramatic sometimes, Mars and Leo. And it's going to, because every sign has a gift and a challenge. The gift is extroversion. The challenge is melodrama. But it's going to oppose Pluto. And we can feel it coming all this couple of weeks. Just a week ago, Mercury, which has been retrograde, so turned direct. So the communication is easing up this week. There's a lot of clearing up of misunderstandings going on. And we can take this time as like, now I'm beginning to get, it takes a while for Mercury to build up speed and progress, but now it's a good time to kind of get our ducks in a row, make sure we're on the same page with other people, get our process moving forward. And Mercury opposed Mars, pardon me, so many planets, Mars tomorrow, as it goes into Leo and changes signs, speaking of edgewalking, it's right at 0 degrees. And it's going to oppose Pluto, which is at 0 degrees of Aquarius. I'm going to come back to that one. And they are both square Jupiter, who just went into Taurus. So it's at 0 degrees of Taurus. and it's going to form a right angle, and it's what we call a T-square. And the missing point is in Scorpio, and the South Node is there right now. So when you have a square or an opposition, it can feel like a combustion engine. Time it right and it drives you. The most successful charts have a lot of squares in them because they're working so hard to kind of put these pieces together that are uncomfortable, that they go places and they make things happen. It's helpful to have a balance in our chart between the tough aspects that drive us and the easy aspects that ease the way and make it comfortable. Too much of one or the other can be more of a challenge, but you have to consciously work with it. So with that T-square, the chances that boundaries will be an issue in people's psyches, in relationships, between countries, on our border, in the Ukraine, that tension. We have Mars, who is, the first planet past us, the first planet who orbit has nothing to do with the sun, because Venus and Mercury can only go so far away from the sun from our perspective here on Earth. But Mars moves around, appears to retrograde in its cycle. It's red, it's willful, it's busy. It was natural that it would be thought of as the god of war, but also the god of willpower and athleticism, and our yes and our no, our boundaries and our passions. So Mars in Leo, which is, the term martial arts, and opposing Pluto, the lord of death and rebirth and willpower, squaring Jupiter, which is bigger than all the other planets put together. So Jupiter is about expanding. Now, if you expand a gift, it's wonderful. If you expand your waistline, not so good. Here is expanding attention. And so it's good for us to have places to go and things to do. That can be very easy to get depressed over the next few weeks if we don't feel like we're getting somewhere on anything. When in doubt, clear a drawer. Like, just do something and feel like, okay, I'm getting some momentum. And then this can work for you. This kind of driving energy can work for you. Because it's kind of tense, if you can choose not to get into an argument with an ex-lover, it would be a good time not to do that. If you feel like people can get just recreationally difficult during this. So notice when you start into an argument, do people just want to argue? Are they they're just wrestling? Or do they really want to get at the content of the information? And if they're just wrestling, you can choose, do I engage this? Or are they just baiting me and I can point that out? And so that's coming up. But it can help us make progress on it, things that take a lot of energy and challenge for the next few weeks.
I like that recreational arguing. I'm going to take that to my husband. So let's, I want to expand on this and think about, and if languaging, transits, things, larger cycles in life. I read somewhere that COVID landed right at the start of a Saturn-Pluto cycle. And I don't fully understand what that means. I'd love for you to expound on that and to talk about some of these larger cycles of life that we're experiencing right now that are really affecting our lives and in a big global way.
Okay, that's a beautiful one. And there's another piece that I'm going to bring in. It's not predictable per se, but if you go to spaceweather.com and watch what the sun is doing, that's not considered part of astrology because we can't predict it, but it's the volume control and all the other aspects. If you going back in history, there's been a fair amount of research, though a lot of people have just dropped it because why bother, that when the sun is very active, when the sun activates, it changes our, plants grow faster, grains grow faster, trees grow faster, and politics winds up. People get very excited. And it's easy to make change happen. It's easy for war to take off. It's easy for the world to activate. When the sun is quiet and there's not much charge coming from it, our telescopes can see into far space. And it is grains quiet down, the trees quiet down, growth quiets down, but it can be a very culturally rich time. Normally, this cycle is around 11 years. It stayed unusually quiet for a very long stretch during the Baroque period and ended with the French Revolution. The mid-60s, the American Revolution, the French Revolution were right after a peak of solar flares when everybody was getting excited, and now it's like, now we do something about it. Throughout 80% of the major nomadic invasions happened when the sun had been right after a quiet spell, when the grain had gone down, people were hungry, and they went, as soon as it started to activate, they started looking for new answers, invade another country. Right now, we've just come out of, we thought as Obama came in, the sun started to get active, and then it hit a very quiet one. It did not go where they thought it was going to. So it didn't have the oomph of change that we thought was coming in 2008, 2009, as Pluto changed signs, and I'm going to come back to that. So it came down. Then it went into one of the quietest minimums we've seen in a while, couple of years, where there was not a sunspot to be found. And sunspots could be 50,000 miles. They're huge. A solar flare is many Earths big. And the sunspot got very quiet during right before 2019, 2020. The sunspot was at a minimum as Pluto and Saturn conjunct. And so also pandemics are most likely, if you go back through history, during a solar minimum, as if our immune system, it just doesn't have much oomph. And it certainly coincided with the last pandemic. Pluto and Saturn, you have Pluto, we think of as death and rebirth. As a planet, it wasn't born at the same time the rest of our solar system was, we think. It came in from the Oort belt and got caught into a loop. So all the planets are on one plane, Pluto's on a different orbit. Symbolically, we can think of it as something that died as it was and was reborn as a planet in our solar system. And it talks about that cycle of death and rebirth. And it usually means we face something intense, but it's also, Pluto by history was the Lord of mining. And I think of it as a wonderful image for all the psychopomp work of going down deep into the earth, getting gold from under the earth and bringing it up to the surface. And I've got some great stories on that, but coming down to that, so it pushes us. Often the best times in people's lives are right after a tough Pluto transit. When I go back and sit with people at the end of their life and go like, and what happened now? Which I've done some really interesting research on. It helps us, it's like a karmic clearing, but also clarifying what was important to us, letting go of what isn't, and really engaging what is important to us. So the Pluto conjunct Saturn, and Saturn, that planet with its walls around us, talks about structure, security. It's also restriction and density. So on a good day, it gives us structure and support. It's bones and teeth and personal authority. And on a challenging day, it can feel like we're stuck. It's the walls, it's the restriction. So, but it gives us security, walls, bones, history, tradition, personal authority. So Pluto conjunct Saturn was it was in the face of life and death, we had restrictions. Those two planets came together. Now, the last time they were opposite each other, they were right on America's ascended and descended from our mythological chart of the Declaration of Independence. And that happened during 9/11. We saw that coming up. I moved to New York just as that was happening. We thought, oh, this is going to be an intense opposition. And it happened right on the Americas chart. And it happened right the week of the death and rebirth of our country's self-concept. So in that process here, this is the next time those two really lined up together, and they conjunct in 2019, 2020, heading into 2021. And it was a death of what we thought was security and a rebirth of it afterwards, and a total shift in how we saw restrictions. Some people rebelled from the restrictions, some people engaged the restrictions, but we all had to wrestle with those restrictions. And it gave us that question that Pluto does. In the face of life and death, why are you here? Why are you alive? Pluto doesn't ask that as a rhetorical question. It wants you to have a good answer. So it helps you kind of let go of the little answers and come back to something that matters. Does that answer your question?
It does, absolutely. And so come back with a great answer. And every Edgewalker has come into, well, with a powerful mission of knowing that they are here for something big, to do something big in the world, and not necessarily in scope, but in intention.
Right.
And so that's a beautiful thing to think about. So I'm looking at the time. I just have a quick question before I dive into your oracle deck. Have you, as an astrologer, noticed, now that we're really moving into the age of Aquarius in a much bigger way, have you noticed the conversation around astrology shifting? I mean, I feel as though science and spirituality is speaking more openly with one another, in a more friendly manner. And, you know, is it your sense that particularly with quantum, that you're experiencing that in your world, in the people that you're encountering?
Some. I think it's like a lot of political pieces right now. There's nowhere near the conversation there was in the late 60s, early 70s, when it felt very integrated.
Vibrant, yeah.
But then it also went out to the left field. Now, I met my mate, who's a cell biologist, in Santa Fe. And where I was living, I had come to take care of a friend who was dying and stayed because it was beautiful. And it's a place where astrology is a respected profession. And I was considered a grounded astrologer because I have, you know, I try to kind of, how do we make practical use of this information, not living out here, you know. Santa Fe at the time, you know, the joke was, you know, why does the Santa Fean cross the road? And the answer was because they were channeling the chicken. That it was like not grounded. And it was that, so I was, you know, when I met my mate who had just finished a postdoc in cell biology, was so desperate for something more than science. It's like science and spirituality. And I was like so hungry for science, in, you know, not just spirituality, also science. Like, yes. Where is that connection? Where is that, you know, we both think symbolically. How do we do this in a way where it's grounded and real and not an escape pod from our ordinary reality? Indeed. How do we really integrate our spirit, our shopping, our politics, our relationship, how we build our house, everything that connects. So, you know, that was an interesting discussion right there. At the moment, I'm seeing, you know, a tightening down again because spirituality is such a loaded topic at the moment. Yeah. And it is being so misused in many different places, you know, not just by one side or the other. But as like, how do we be true to spirit, but not use it as a way of imposing theory on? And we look back to Aquarius. Every single sign has a gift and a challenge. And the gift of Aquarius is, I start off with it's a fixed air sign. And I think of that as, you know, people in a circle communicating. And it's very political, it's very astrological. I mean, it's very metaphysical. It could be many different ways that we put that. We manifest this. But if we start with what's really happening, like this really was my experience, this is my authentic experience, wasn't what I thought I was going to have, but this is what I had, then it helps me understand something. Let me make a theory about how I work. Let me test that out in the world. Let me share that with the world. Let me produce a philosophy that helps me see the world based on my authentic experience. That is a gift. If I start off with a theory and then I try to cram all my experiences into it and go, You know, how do you feel? Oh, well, I think I should be feeling. My theory on my feelings is that, you know, like taking it from
Good
theory, this
storytelling.
is how the world is, not this is what's really happening. You see that in a lot of politicians with the Moon and Aquarius who are, you know, trying to impose a philosophy rather than hearing what do people actually need. So Pluto, normally it takes about 247 and a few months, years around the zodiac. It's a very slow planet. America has just gone through its first Pluto return. Pluto is in late Capricorn, which is like the death and rebirth of structures, organizations, governments, where it went. Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008, and it just went to Aquarius this spring. It's going to retrograde back for the fall, then go back into Aquarius for the next. If you look at your life and you divide people up by the generation of what they were, I'm in the Pluto and Leo generation. We were, you know, making the most scenes in the 60s and 70s, and you know, they call that the Puer and the Puella generation that just won't grow up. I can admit that some of them. Then the Pluto and Virgo generation, Pluto and Libra generation, the Pluto and Scorpio generation was when a lot of the people that started shooting people in school, they got very intense. Not all of them went that way, but it's a very intense generation. Every time Pluto changed sign, and while Pluto was in Scorpio, the AIDS epidemic happened and the banking and loan crisis. So all the scorpionic, how we relate to other people's bodies and monies, was our place of death and rebirth. Pluto went into Aquarius, into Sagittarius. It left Sagittarius in 2008. I can't remember exactly when it went in, but when it went in, no one believed in climate change. And Sagittarius is about our relationship to the natural world, our relationship to travel. The symbol is a centaur. And how do we wait to the world, the global world, traveling, the bigger picture? By the time Pluto left Sagittarius, almost everybody admitted that climate change existed. 2008, it began that change of governments, went right in, and how do we structure, what is security, how do we use personal authority? And we dealt with a huge outsprouting of dictatorships around the world, and have been working on that. There's been some real gifts to it, but there's also been this other side about how do we claim personal authority and deal with those structures that work. Pluto just went into Aquarius, is backing up, is going to go forward. Now it's how does the group work? Pluto is coming back to where it was when we wrote our Constitution. What a beautiful vision statement that is. How do we come back to that vision? But that sense of abstracting of this is what we think we should feel. You know, this is what, you know, Montana just outlawed TikTok this week. You know, that's, you know, the group mind, all of those things about how the group works will be up. AI, all the internet conversation, how does, you know, the voice of the people is important if the people are educated. How do we educate the demos so it makes good decisions? Because the group mind, we're getting so connected and so collected that for the next 20 some years, while Pluto is in Aquarius, how those group dynamics work and how we are affected by them, how we can steer it in a good way is going to be on the front burner of how do we handle change. And I think that that concept of where is truth, where is not truth, and how do we speak for each other kicked in the minute Pluto went into Aquarius and backs up and goes forward.
Thank you. That was quite something. I want to dive into your oracle, your deck, and your books, your resources, your Star Codes Oracle deck. I hope you have yours right there because mine are upstate. Yay! And we had spoken, Heather and I had spoken about her pulling a card, but I want to ask you, your deck, you call your deck an oracle deck, and there is there a difference between tarot and oracle to you, and what is that?
Well, tarot is a very specific form of oracle deck. It has, you know, 78 chart planets. Oh, I wanted to say, come back to one point. I didn't mention, we got spent the sun got very quiet during the pandemic. Now the sun is getting more active, much faster than we thought it would. And it is cooking. And so everybody, you can see that politics is just starting to percolate. It's really interesting to watch how fast it's going, much faster, much hotter than we thought it was going to be. Today, we're having some really good X-class solar flares. So in that, back to the Oracle deck, Oracle decks, all the forms of auspice talk about synchronicity. Do I see the birds flying from left to right and think that they mean something to me? If my subconscious is trying to knock on the door and say, hello, I want you to look at something that just happened, here's a symbol, that's why those birds would be significant today. Sometimes it can be more clearly a conversation between you and the world. One day I was driving home from work in Santa Fe and a coyote stopped my car right in the middle, wouldn't let me go. And just stared at me. And I went like, what? And I said, something unexpected is going to happen. And it stared at me. And I said, I should go home and clear my schedule. And it kind of nodded and walked off. And I went like, oh, well, okay, I'm going home, cleared my schedule, got the news my mother had stopped swallowing and I needed to get home. I got home on the next plane because I'd already cleared my schedule. And the airport was closed down with snow, and I would never have made it in if that coyote hadn't spoken to me. But I had to look for, why was this an auspice? My subconscious was trying to tell me something, and the patterns of the universe helped me see that. If the so all forms of, whether you're throwing dice or you open the Bible and point to a page, or what form do you let your unconscious and the universe speak to each other and give you a little bit more information? Then usually it's like, how do you interpret that for the best of all sentient beings, for yourself, for wisdom, how do I take that? So tarot cards have a specific symbol system that they've been working on for several hundred years. And it has suits and archetypes and power, and you can tell stories with it. That's really beautiful. But there are many, like the animal cards are some of my favorites. Like, what medicine do I need here? I need hummingbird medicine. But sure enough, if I channel that busyness and thoughtfulness and looking for the sweetness here, and I play with the metaphor of hummingbird, it might solve the problem in a way that wouldn't have occurred to me otherwise. So it stretched me. One theory on why divination works throughout history was that it just encouraged people to hunt where they hadn't hunted before. I think that it's more than that, but that's a start. It stretches us to try a different approach. So Oracle decks are less complex patterns where you're not necessarily reading a story that's built in the symbol system. They're more, you pick a card, 3 cards that will tell you a story about that moment. You ask it questions, you pick a card, and it will give you a symbol. And I think of astrology has got some of the most powerful symbols working. Why not work with those symbols as oracle cards? Both because I think they work as oracle cards, and because so many people say, oh, I couldn't start astrology. It's just too complicated. So I say, okay, pull just one card at a time. And let's see what it means for you. And so the first card I pulled for this group today, just now, was Pluto. And Pluto is the planet, and it's about rebirth. It says rebirth at the bottom. And it's one of the things that I saw when I did the chart for your organization, was a loaded 8th house. It's a chart of a mystery school. It's a chart of people trying to understand what's going on behind the scenes with empathy and clarity. And it's, very magical, but it's also very specific and deep, the chart for the Edgewalkers. So I loved that. And when I see this card about Pluto, death and rebirth, that this card suggests to me that the organization may be going through some transformation but I didn't ask, what's the chart going through? I asked, what were you about? That it's about that being able to walk with people when they go through their transformation. And I think that that is something that could be very powerful for anybody in this organization, because if they have experienced the need to integrate their lives, to bring their spirituality and their practicality together, their profession and their heart, they know that that is the agony that most people are going through, that there is a bifurcation, there's a split in their souls out there. How do you help them begin to put those pieces together and create one philosophically and symbolically, structurally integrated life that's very versatile? So that's what I pulled the card.
Spectacular. Yeah. And just if it was not clear to everyone, we had the idea to create the chart for the birth of Edgewalkers. And Judy had shared that the idea for it happened when her book was published, Edgewalkers was published. Is that correct, Judy?
The date I have is October 31st, 2006, 3 p.m.
Yes.
That's the date the book was published, and community came out of that.
Lovely, lovely.
So that was its birthday party. That's beautiful.
That was spectacular, Heather. Absolutely spectacular. Well, so we don't have a lot of time, but left, unless people are willing to stick around for a few more moments. I'd love to open this up for some Q&A. I'm sure lots of people have some questions for our dear Heather Roan Robbins. Let's shoot them off into the if you've already done a question up, it doesn't look like it.
Some lovely hello to everybody from Connecticut to Texas to Minnesota, Dubai, Salisbury, hello. My homes, Bahrain, everybody, welcome. It's lovely to see you. Do you have questions? 2 new messages. Okay.
I don't see a question yet, unless it's going directly to you.
Nope.
But Allie has her hand up.
Oh, okay. Allie, please.
Hi, Heather. Thank you so much for this overview. I've sort of skirted the edge of astrology for a long time. I mean, I've had my chart done many times, and I've been told that, well, this is what's going to happen. And I've never really quite believed that. I always felt like I had the free will to make choices within those confines. So
very much so.
Yes. So what you've said really, really affirms that. So thank you. And it's everything that you've spoken of is like right where I'm at. So it's I really love this overview. So thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Ali. I have a question from Annabelle Asher. How do I work with my heavy aspects? And this makes me want to ask about shadow.
There, you always express an aspect, but there are powerful ways to do so. If you see a series of Pluto transits coming in, how do you dive into that? How do you deal with your own Pluto, your own death and rebirth? How do you see, I see when people go through a Pluto square opposition, they often have a brush with life and death. Now that could be a cancer scare, which happened to me, or when I moved into New York just in time for 9/11, I was fine, but I was smelling burning corpses for 5 years, for 5 months. Or it can be something symbolic, like you read in the newspaper that there was a car accident on the corner that you walked by the day before. It could have been you. It wasn't. How do you use this to go, okay, well, what's on my bucket list? What do I want to do to be fully alive? It's when falling, dive. When you have lemons, make lemonade. It's find a positive expression for those symbols. And if you can embrace the positive aspect of those symbols, and that's the book that I'm writing about, how to, what are the positive aspects to every sign, as a house and aspect, then you can usually redirect it. Not always, sometimes, fate whoops you, but it's a sense of being able to redirect it in a good way and in a powerful way. There was one group of people that I remember, 2 charts, and it said they were going through an aspect which the textbook says, you will meet with strong and forceful personalities. Resources will be shared, but this will come naturally. And one woman said, oh, I guess I better, I'll accept that invitation to the charity ball. I'll go. I met all kinds of famous people, and they wiggled me for some money, and I gave it to them. But I met with strong and forceful personalities. I had a wonderful evening. I met good connections. I gave it away. Another woman said, I'm not going to give anything away. Darn them. I'm just like, I will not. Nope. And so she was walking, stormed out of some event, and she was walking down the road with her purse, and a guy jumped out of his car, knocked her flat, grabbed her purse, and ran. She shared her resources. It came naturally. They both met with strong and forceful personalities. One worked with it, one did not. So it's often, sometimes it can be quite literally, how do I find a positive expression of these symbols? If you have a Uranus transit coming up, a tough, Uranus is the planet that spins slightly backwards and sideways. One pole is always pointed towards the sun. Venus turns slowly backwards. Uranus spins very quickly. It's a big planet, but it spins. One day on Uranus is 15 hours here on Earth, very fast and backwards. It has a very strange electrical orbit. And it changed our world when we discovered it, because it suddenly blew our minds about what our solar system was. So and I always think of Monty Python's phrase, and now for something completely different. It will challenge you and push you to transform. So if you try to hold on to what you're doing and make no changes, it will be a disaster. It will be fighting that Uranus, and it will happen to you. If you go like, what I've always wanted to do? I've always wanted to go to the Peace Corps, or I'm going to move to Madagascar. It's time. It says, or I'm going to just let that go and say goodbye to my mother-in-law who's driving me crazy and really do the work I came here to do. And then Uranus will help you make those changes and help you take a risk and help you reach for something you hadn't done before. It's primordial chaos used positively. Uranus, planet of god of primordial chaos, from which everything was birthed.
Susan Link says, I am one of those folks who thought I could not use astrology because it's too complicated. To your point, Heather, I love star codes, decks, clarity, and helpfulness. As a side note, it's really beautiful. So we can purchase your fantastic Oracle deck from your website as well as Amazon.
And
Is that true?
Hay House is having a sale on it. I just found out yesterday, towards May 31st to the first week of June. So you can buy it directly from Hay House, should you want to. And the booklet that comes with it will tell you a little bit about everything. It's all the signs, the aspects, houses, some of the basic concepts of astrology, and you can just learn them one at a time. Or find that if, for instance, if you make a choice on one direction, like any form of oracle deck, if you pick it, it often works easiest at the beginning when you're getting the hang of it. When you're at a crossroads, when you say, do I do this or do I do that? I pull 2 cards for this and it takes me there. I pull 2 cards for that and it takes me there. So that it can, you can say, do I want, there's usually no wrong answer. It's which direction do I feel most comfortable pursuing?
Okay. Somebody has put, can you put that info in the chat, meaning Hay House information? Is it just
Okay.
hayhouse.org or hayhouse.com?
Yep. It's just, let me go find that out for you. And
your website, Heather Roan Robbins.
It's just roanrobbins.com. Or, and if you want to read, one of the easy ways to start working with astrology, and it's hayhouse.com, Hay house.com. If you want to work with, if you Google star codes, my article is on medium.com, a couple of other websites, and on my Facebook page. Heather Roan Robbins star codes. If you, in it weekly, I put a little bit about the astrological weather of the week. And it's a way of just trying it on and then seeing how your day goes. Sometimes it might, I have to put it very generally because I'm working with the symbols that can be applied in so many different ways. But it can be helpful to get a feeling of how to work with the weather system, the astrological weather system.
Okay, I'm getting Hay House in here now. hayhouse.com. Your website. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Ali. Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful. Eric Jennings, our friend from the new seminary. It's great to see. Oh, thanks for all of these wonderful comments. So I wanted to quickly plug my podcast again to let everyone know that I have a podcast called The Edge of Every Day, and I have my own YouTube channel, Sandra Bargman, On the Edge of Every Day. And the first episode is with Heather. And I also have an episode with Judy Neal. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to those, please do so, and please subscribe. I'm on a bit of a hiatus, but I will be back. Your book, Palmistry, Moon Wisdom and Everyday Palmistry. We didn't have an opportunity to touch on that, but if you want to quickly give an overview and where people
both of those are easy places to start. Moon Wisdom talks about how to work with the moon in the daily, in the daily astrological calendar, which you can find out online, and in the chart of a person. If you know their moon sign, you know how to make them feel at home, how to make them more comfortable, how to tick them off too. But it can help you work with people and make them feel heard and comfortable. The Everyday Palmistry is, and you can get that on Kindle as well as the solid book, is I designed it for people who are not palmist, are not interested in becoming palmist, but they shake hands all the time, or they see people wave, or they talk and communicate. And so we use a lot of famous hands there as just a way of giving you more power to work with that's not necessarily astrological.
Great. And both of those can links are on your website as well. So, people can get directed to all of the various places on your website, roanrobbins.com. And booking for sessions with you is also on your website.
Directly.
Yes?
Yep.
Excellent. Judy Neal, have I done all the housekeeping? Is there anything you would like to add after this spectacular conversation with Heather Roan Robbins?
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you so much for facilitating such thoughtful, inspiring, and educational session today. And thank you, Heather. Thank you so much. I just put, I'm going to be in touch, Heather. I put information about the upcoming Edgewalker cafes and the Edgewalker website and how you can sign up for our newsletter for Edgewalkers. So we hope you'll join us. And I just want to turn it over to Patricia to just describe next month's June 15th Edgewalker Cafe with Marian Head. Patricia?
Can't hear you.
All right. Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you, Heather. Oh my God, it was fabulous. And Sandra, it's June 15th. It's going to be 1 o'clock Eastern. Marian Head is a dear friend and colleague of mine from Kauai, and it'll be 7 in the morning for her. So it's 1 Eastern time. And she wrote a book and created something called Revolutionary Agreements, a personal path to peace on earth. And she's going to speak about what those revolutionary agreements are, how to practically and in other ways apply them into our life. And the book was also co-authored and the foreword by Barbara Marx Hubbard. It's an amazing tool for kind of practical spirituality for Edgewalkers and really the planet. So it's on the Thursday, was that the 16th, 15th, Judy? Or the date?
15th.
15th, sorry. 15th at 1 o'clock. So there'll be more coming out in the newsletter and everything. But thank you for that. And Marian couldn't be here to say hi, but we look forward to next month.
Thank
Very
you,
much
Patricia.
looking forward to that. Yes.
And thank you again to Sandra and Heather. Thank you so much.
Great
Thank
pleasure.
you. Thank you, dear Heather Roan Robbins. Thanks for everyone
Thank
for
you all.
tuning in.
Take care.
Did Heather leave?
I think she did.
Okay.
Should I
I
see if I
wanted,
can get her
I
back
wanted
in?
to ask her a question, but I'll just, is her website here?